talks, and we're going to entertain any questions from the audience or online. This is being streamed, and I know that we may have some questions coming from the outside audience. So, are there any questions? Yes. Are there any other questions? Yes. And we have a, there you go.
Thank you. I'm Kathy from Indiana. I have a question about biomarkers. For a number of years, we've been hearing about some things that to me seem pretty simple, like serum creatinine and the retina thickness, and those things that are not terribly expensive to test. We have people with ALS who would be more than willing to give some blood and have an OCT. So what does it take to get those biomarkers figured out once and for all, so that we don't have this kind of maybe it is, maybe it isn't, get a definitive answer, it is or it isn't? Or aren't they even interesting? Because they keep coming up at meetings. So.
Who would like to take? James, John?
The issue with those types of biomarkers, especially the creatinine and the OCT, the question is how do they correlate with disease? And what you really need is longitudinal data to see whether the changes in those markers actually reflect a change in disease. The other issue about biomarkers is that we would love to test a biomarker against a successful therapy, and we don't have a really good successful therapy because we'd like to see that biomarker change in the right direction in the same way that the disease course changes in the right direction. So I think many of us are collecting these types of data and putting them into our databases, and we do share a lot of those databases and a lot of that data, and hopefully eventually we'll be able to correlate whether it be creatinine or OCTs or anything else. Uric acid has come out as well with disease progression, and then it becomes at least a little bit more useful. James?
So, I mean, specifically creatinine, we have big databases that we've looked at, and if you look at it one way, it kind of looks like it might track with disease progression to some extent. If you look at it another way, it doesn't. So that one, I mean, there's at least some data saying it, you know, maybe it changes over time, but maybe not as predictably as we need it to be. So one of the things about a biomarker like creatinine, say, we know it's not there's nothing specific about ALS. You know, I mean, it changes in lots of diseases. So one of the things about a biomarker is that it has to do some job better than our current tools, or more cheaply, or more accessibly, or something. And so if there's a pretty good correlation between, say, ALS-FRS and creatinine, but creatinine is maybe more variable, then it's maybe better to do ALS-FRS. And so that's, I think for creatinine, that's one of the challenges for where we've been, is that it hasn't been clearly less variable or easier to do than you know, our typical outcomes. OCT, you know, OCT is, you know, part of that is funding, because you need to organize larger groups of people to have OCT, and so you need to do kind of a larger study, and then it's a lot of funding to put into, you know, one marker that may or may not work. One of the ways that we've been successful in moving some of these biomarkers, or even if we just extend it to, say, outcome measures forward, is to incorporate them into trials. So the Centaur trial, which is of TUDCA and sodium phenylbutyrate, is incorporating ATLAS, which is a new way of looking at quantitative strength testing. And we'll get, I think, a bigger data set about that quantitative strength testing than we've ever had before, because it's a part of a trial. Compliance in the trial is much higher relative to biomarker studies where we have a lot of dropout. So a lot of this comes back to, you know, how does it prioritize in the sort of funding scheme of things? How does it prioritize? I think there's some good ideas there. I think they're both really interesting ideas.
There are also large multi-center efforts to look at biomarkers longitudinally over time, as well as cross-sectionally at a single time in space or several times. And so I would encourage everybody to participate in a biomarker study, because this is going to be key to our future studies in defining endpoints and helping us to segregate populations and identify responder populations. Are there any?
I have a question.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Related to the longitudinal biomarker, I would like to invite everybody to my poster where we have tested testosterone levels in males at various stages. So, yes, it's not a longitudinal study, but we have done a cross-sectional study, and we have correlated the levels of testosterone age match with like normal age match level with the ALS male patients, and we have drawn graphs with those stages. And what we have found, almost 70% of male ALS patients had lower testosterone levels than normal, and as the stage increased, the levels went lower. So I don't know whether any of you have any previous experience with testosterone. I would like to ask.
So testosterone was identified as lower in affected males and goes lower as the disease progresses. So do any of you have any experience with testosterone level?
Trial, yeah. So Jonathan and I were looking at each other and saying there was a small trial that was done years ago that didn't seem to have the benefit that we would hope for. But I to be honest, I can't remember what the
It was decadurabolin.
What
Decadurabolin, I think, was an anabolic steroid.
yes, right.
And
right.
it was like a phase 2.
Yeah, there was a phase 2 study.
Yeah.
But I don't remember is whether there was preliminary evidence of low testosterone. I don't remember the answer to that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that's really
because-
interesting data, I think.
Because
to
a lot
think
of
about.
animal experiments have shown testosterone treatment have benefited many mechanisms in ALS mice model.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I think we have a question over
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, thank you very much for the very nice presentation. I think drug therapy is obviously a very important avenue, but we have been waiting for this kind of animal testing and that approach for a very long time. But in the meantime, our data already, the data you've shown, the proteomic data and other biomarker data have indicated that neuroinflammation, stress played a huge role in ALS. Can we find other ways to reduce inflammation through the non-drug approach? For example, acupuncture. I think now there is a Western medicine version of acupuncture that stimulates the vagus nerve, that really bring down the stress. Because in the Chinese medicine field, they consider a lot of the aging-related illness, including all the degenerative diseases, they consider as a kidney weakness, or in Western medicine term, adrenal exhaustion. And if you can reduce the use of adrenaline and increase the relaxation response, that could potentially have a big impact on the disease process. So I felt that we should be looking at more revenue at the same time, rather than the entire world waiting for the SOD mice to give us the answer. Thank you.
Anyone want to? Thank you. Does any of our panel want?
So I mean, I would say that from a clinical perspective, I think we probably, at least in the U.S., spend a lot of time titrating medications up and down, and probably not enough time thinking about non-medical factors and emotional stress and physical stress and sort of whole body medicine. I think that's probably true in ALS. It's probably true in a lot of disorders. I think that is the bent of the Western medicine model as it's applied in the U.S. anyway. And so I think there is actually a lot to be sort of learned and looked at and thought about. And I think, you know, one way that we talk about that in a tractable way is the multidisciplinary model, but that's only one part of it. And so, you know, I know there have been trials of acupuncture in other diseases to varying degrees of success. I think that's only probably one piece of it, and I think probably focusing too closely on just acupuncture probably sells the rest of the sort of holistic medicine short.
I agree.
These trials are really difficult to design, I think, and so from a trial perspective. Just as an example, Nick Maragakis ran an exercise trial, and it was one of the most methodologically challenging trials that we've done in recent years, I should say, because there's decades. Just because you're sort of, you know, how you think about the counterfactual, the sort of placebo or counterfactual group is really difficult. But, you know, my bent is that this is important.
So I have to encourage you. What we do is not exclusive. We don't own ALS.
Yeah, thank you very much.
This is not our disease.
That's the point.
We do what we do,
Yeah.
but you do what you do.
Excellent.
And I encourage you to do it.
Yeah, thank you very much.
But I'm not the expert. I don't think we are.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Go for it.
Yeah, and I mean, the other thing too, just to key in on your immune modulation comment for a second, we've banged pretty hard on that as a community, and it's not an easy one. What role the immune system actually plays in ALS is still a mystery, I might say. We know that we don't like what it's doing in some respects, and we know we want to, I'll use the word control it a little bit better than what's happening, but how to do that pharmacologically or otherwise, I don't think we have figured that one out yet.
And-
I have a tip that I think a vitamin D deficiency can trigger neuroinflammation. I think that's something that we've been looking at.
So that is something that we actually published on not too long ago, and we expected to see a vitamin D deficiency, actually. I think setting out in that analysis, we thought we would, but we didn't see different levels of vitamin
Well,
D.
I think that it depends on where that person's vitamin D level is supposed to be, because the heterogeneity that if you, another thing I think we need to pay attention is that vitamin D low, that for patients who have symptoms but not yet getting into ALS, this is the point we need to help them to correct if we can possibly do. Make them sleep enough, because during sleep the toxin goes away. That's the data that we already know. Sleep tight, sleep, what do you call, good night, sleep clean.
Yeah.
That's the,
Right.
that's the
So those are things
research.
that our more straightforward approach wouldn't have picked up those lines.
But again, you bring up a really interesting point to key on what Kathy asked about earlier, which is replication and biomarker studies across all diseases is really challenging. How are the samples collected? When were they collected? How were they stored? What assay did this group use? What assay did that group use? It's amazing when you look across all fields how many biomarker studies do not replicate. And I know that there's efforts going on to standardize in our community how that's happening, but you know, you bring up a point. I mean, depending upon when you collect your sample, your vitamin D levels could be all over the planet.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we have another,
There's a request that people identify themselves.
sure, okay. Sorry, can you check and see, because it is a little bit,
Is it working now? There we go. My name is Stephen Winthrop. I have ALS. My question is that when we look at some of the complications in the rollout of Radicava this year, there have been some neurologists and some insurance companies who have been reluctant to recommend Radicava to patients who don't fit the same profile as those shown in the last trial that was done in Japan. My question is to both Steve and James, given, Steve, what you were saying about precision medicine, and James, what you were saying about reducing the heterogeneity of samples of patients who participate in trials. Are we looking to a future where we will be asking the FDA to approve therapies or drugs that are only for certain subtypes of the ALS population, and not the wide label that the FDA gave to Radicava this spring?
James, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So that's a really, really, really good question. I mean, I think, and there's a lot of debate around that question, as you alluded to, for edaravone. There are a couple of ways we can make there are many ways we can make subgroups, and there are a couple of reasons that we might make subgroups. So one way to make subgroups is to say clinically, this kind of patient looks similar to that kind of person with ALS. So you might say clinically, we want all people with right arm weakness, because we're going to test strength in the right arm, and we want it to be, stronger than this and weaker than that, sort of in the middle somewhere, because we want everyone to start with the same amount of right arm weakness. And that's where we're focusing, because that's what our outcome is. And that will give us a statistical edge. Nowhere in that reasoning are we saying biologically people who have right arm weakness are similar, or our drug targets the right side of the body over the left side of the body, or anything like that. It's just that by reducing the heterogeneity, clinical heterogeneity, we may have a better chance of statistically seeing a change in right arm strength, and that's sort of the outcome that we've chosen. That's a simple-minded kind of example, but the point is that we just want our measurements to start similar, and then we want to see them change, and we want the change to be, as much change over time to be as much similar between patients as we can, because that gives us statistical power. It says nothing of biology. From there, you might reason that we could generalize our results from the right arm to the right leg to the left arm. I mean, that's a group where you may well make the case that what we saw in slowing the progression of strength decline in the right arm generalizes to the whole body and to a larger population, because there's no biological underpinning to it. Another way to make subgroups is to say these are all C9 ALS patients, and we're treating them with a C9 gene therapy or gene-directed therapy. And that's a really different way to make a subgroup and a different way to use a subgroup. And it is not obvious that you can generalize that to a group outside of the C9, because there your subgroup is a biological subgroup and tied to the drug mechanism. The challenge is that sometimes, those are two very clear examples, but sometimes we don't really know what the relationship between a clinical phenotype and a biological underpinning is, and that's the gray area that we have to navigate. So you might be making a clinical phenotype, people with early disease that's rapidly progressive, and you're saying we're just doing that for statistical reasons, but what may remain somewhat unclear is whether there is any biology linking that subgroup. And that's where I think some of the debate comes in.
Steve?
I would answer Steve's question a little bit differently. So what the FDA did with Radicava is a little scary, because it's not what they typically do. They typically do the opposite, right? They would have approved it for the very specific cohort of folks that showed efficacy and then spread it out over time. That's what they've done for other disease indications. They totally flipped it around here, and I get the unmet need and why they did it, but it really complicates the future of drug development if that process continues, right? Because you can envision in a very short period of time, Biogen's antisense molecule might only work in 2% of ALS, but hey, there's a lot of folks out there that say misfolded SOD1 is in sporadic ALS. Other labs say it's not. If I'm a patient and I'm a sporadic patient with no SOD1 mutation, I want that drug. I want access to it. I want access even if I don't have a C9 overexpansion repeat, because the antibodies that detect the dipeptide repeats are also not that great. So I want that drug too. So if you fast forward 10 years from now and you want to bring a drug into phase 2 in ALS, and there's 35 FDA-approved drugs for ALS with no stratification, we don't know if any of them really work, how do you design that trial? I don't really know.
Even though you didn't ask me, I'm going to respond. Because I've thought about this a lot as well, and I think the best thing that would happen is that, in fact, the labeling that the FDA gives is for specific subgroups of ALS. That means that our science has moved far enough that we understand it. And look back at the cancer literature. We used to treat women with breast cancer. Everybody got the same thing. But now we know that some people with estrogen receptor positive get a different drug than the HER2 positive patients, because they have been able to say, this drug doesn't work for this group, but it does work for that group. And so that would be the best thing that could happen, is that we know enough about the biology of this disease that say that this bin responds to this drug, this bin responds to that drug, and the FDA should be very specific about how they actually label these drugs. So I think that would be a good thing.
You know,
And economically, it makes sense as well, by the way. These medications are not cheap.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, but I just have to voice the other concern, which is that if you know, there are many times where we're designing trials where we say people have to be under 80, and they have to be, their vital capacity has to be over some threshold, and they can't have a feeding tube, and we're doing that. Even those things show us clearly, if you look at the PROACT database, which is a conglomeration of data from clinical trials compared to a clinic population, all of those are already creating a subgroup. And I actually don't think it's unreasonable to generalize from that sort of standard process to people with ALS. I mean, I think if you were to say, well, we're not going to allow people with certain clinical characteristics to receive riluzole, because the trial selected somebody who didn't have possible ALS, so you shouldn't treat possible ALS. I think that's not right.
But I think you already answered that question, because if there's not a biological reason to exclude patients, then we shouldn't exclude patients. But I would love to see enough understanding of the underlying biology of disease that we do find biological differences and say, this drug's going to work specifically for this group. And I think the C9 and the SOD1 antisense is our first foray into that kind of very specific therapy.
And I agree 100% with that.
Well, it's
They had better work, by the way. We've known that antisense strategies in the animal models have worked for 15 years, replicated by dozens of labs across the globe. If they go into the clinic and don't work, we know that antisenses are challenging clinically, but the technology is finally ready for prime time. It could be the first really great disease-modifying drugs we see is the antisense and gene therapies for SOD, C9orf.
And for those of you out there who don't have a C9 mutation or an SOD1 mutation, this is still really good, because it shows us that we can do it if it works. And we will go to the next step, and maybe patients who have an inflammatory profile will respond to this drug, and somebody who has, low vitamin D will respond. I don't know, but
That's right.
this is where we're going.
It's 4:30 or later. I want to thank my panel, and thank you, Steve, for starting a lively discussion. I thought we would wake everybody up here, but I want to thank our panel. We really appreciate you taking the time out and coming and talking with us. So can we please have a round of applause? And if you have any burning questions, I'm sure that as people try to make their way out, you can ask or email TDI, and they can forward us questions, and we can address them for you. But thank you very much for sticking it out, staying, and I hope you got something out of the program. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Thank you. It was great. It was really good. It was great.